but now the count resets to 0. The bracket is set for the 2021 Big Dance, and on the Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem Special, we react to all of it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem Special. I am Ben Stevens, the host of Locked On Big Ten, joined by my man Josh Neighbors, the host of Locked On Big 12. We will be joined throughout this show, the next hour, getting you set for everything, and I mean everything you need to know throughout the 2021 NCAA tournament by our correspondents from around the Locked On Podcast Network's college channel. We have Tyler Rocky, the host of Locked On Syracuse. He will be our ACC guy and our mid-major correspondent as well. And Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC will be here with us. And then you'll hear from the local experts who are peeled into their specific programs throughout this Bracket Mayhem Special over the next hour. Josh Neighbors, we have made it. We have an NCAA tournament on the horizon just a couple of days away, starting with Wednesday's first 4 matchups inside Mackey Arena in West Lafayette, Indiana, where all of the NCAA tournament will take place in that great state of Indiana. We are here. How excited are you?
I'm thrilled, man. And just these kids, the fact that they've made it through an unconventional season, a weird season, they sacrificed so much, everybody involved has. And it's just great that we have a bracket now to discuss, break down all of those things. And it feels like that full 2-year gap you talked about. It feels longer than that, I think, for a lot of fans. So it's just thrilling to have it back.
728 days since the last Selection Sunday. Again, on that date, March 17th, 2019. But on this Sunday, March 14th, 2021, that count has been reset to 0. We will be 709 days away from the April 8th championship game in 2019 to that first 4 matchup. But before we get to the first 4, let's talk about the top seed lines. And really, Josh, it was chalk across the top. What we expected heading in to the selection committee reveal on this Selection Sunday. The top 4 seeds on that one line: Gonzaga, number 1 overall; Baylor on that one line as well; Illinois and Michigan. A little bit disappointing. The committee decided to stick with the overall East, Midwest, South, and West regions because we're playing everything in Indiana. However, pretty chalk across the board, even when you look on that 2 line: Iowa, Ohio State, Houston, and Bama in that Michigan region as well. Some of your reactions about the fact it was pretty chalk what we saw across the top seed lines.
Well, those conference championship wins helped a lot of those teams cinch up those spots, right? I mean, Ohio State had to beat Illinois to make a push for a 1 seed. Alabama winning their conference solidified them on that 2 line. Baylor had some losses to give. Gonzaga did, but they didn't lose it all. And then Illinois, I mean, the run they were on at the end of the year cemented really how good they were as a 1 seed. And then a 2 line, kind of the same theory, same thought process works there. So not a lot of shocks or surprises, even up to that 3, maybe even the 4 line, but pretty chalk there, which is totally what we expected and also deserved for these teams.
And 2 of those teams on that 2-seeded line, Iowa and Ohio State. And the great thing about the Locked On Podcast Network is the strength in numbers we have across the college channel. I know we have some reaction from both of those hosts. Let's hear from Locked On Hawkeyes' Andrew Wade on where Iowa finds themselves in the 2021 Big Dance.
Hey, all, it is Andrew Wade, host of the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast, your daily podcast covering your Iowa Hawkeyes on the Locked On Sports Network. Iowa just got the last 2 seed, which is fantastic. I feel like that gives them a great advantage coming into a 1 seed perspective. They did lose to Iowa earlier in the season on a very, very bad shooting performance, but I feel like out of all the 1 seeds, Iowa matches up best with Gonzaga. So that'll be very interesting to watch. Alongside this bracket as well, we have to watch the COVID issues with Virginia and Kansas. So make sure to check that out. That could be a big impact into the success of Iowa moving throughout this bracket. But let's not look past our first round matchup taking place on Saturday. Iowa gets Grand Canyon University. The Antelopes finished 17-6 with only 1 win against a team ranked 159th or better in KenPom. However, the Lobes have 2 giants down low, which will be a big-time test for Iowa's Luka Garza and the depth that the Hawks have at that center position. 7 foot tall and 6'10" at the power forward in that center position. A lot of height, a lot of length down low. But that should provide ample opportunity for the Hawks perimeter players to have big showings. And if they can shoot the ball well, this should be a pretty easy win for the Hawks getting past that first round matchup and moving on to the second round matchup. We'll be breaking down this matchup though and all the other matchups for the Iowa Hawkeyes throughout the NCAA tournament with former Iowa basketball player Bakari Evelyn on the show throughout the week. So stay tuned to the Locked On Hawkeyes podcast. Find us wherever you get your podcasts at. Search Locked On Hawkeyes. I'm your host Andrew Wade and be back a little bit later for some more content covering your Iowa Hawkeyes.
If there needed to be any more reason to watch that beautiful mug and listen to what Andrew Wade has to say on Locked On Hawkeyes, to have former Iowa player who was in that program in recent years, and Bakari Evelyn, breaking down the Hawks run through March Madness, there you go. You have everything you need, and that is the expertise we have across the local level here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Iowa and Gonzaga played on Saturday, December 19th, back in the non-conference portion of the season. Gonzaga victorious in that game, but Iowa, if they can get to the Elite Eight, will match up with the Zags again in that regional final out in the West region, but everything again played in the great state of Indiana. Also on that two-line, Josh Neighbors, we have the Ohio State Buckeyes. The host of Locked On Buckeyes, Jay Stevens, now with some reaction on where Ohio State stands heading into the tournament.
The matchup has been revealed. What is up, guys? My name is Jay Stevens, the host of Locked On Buckeyes, and the Ohio State Buckeyes, the number 2 seed in their region, will be facing off against the number 15 seed, the Oral Roberts Golden Eagles, in the first round of the NC2A tournament. Oral Roberts, 16-10 on the season, 10-5 in conference play, and they are winners of the Summit League Conference Tournament as well. They won that championship game. It was a 3-point win over North Dakota State. The Buckeyes played a whole lot better during the conference tournament than they did during the final stretch of the regular season, and I'm sure Buckeye fans hope that trend continues. To hear more on the Ohio State Buckeyes, subscribe to Locked On Buckeyes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And Josh, before we move on to some of the biggest snubs, because the top seeded lines were pretty much chalk, I do want to ask you about that 3 line, because 3 of the 4 teams that are number 3 seeds heading into the NCAA tournament, coming out of your neck of the woods, the Big 12. We have Texas, West Virginia, and Kansas. And as Andrew Wade mentioned, both Kansas and Virginia, who are in the West region, dealing with some COVID issues at the moment. But your overall reaction on the Big 12 having 3 seeds as 3 number 3 seeds, I should say.
Right, they were scattered all over the place at the end of the season. We didn't know where they would go, but they got this one right. Actually, I thought Oklahoma State could have made a push, but they couldn't put all of those teams on that 3 line. But Texas, your winner of the Big 12 tournament, obviously they deserve to be there. West Virginia as well on that 3 line, a team that's very deserving. And then the third one was Kansas as well. Big questions about who's going to show up for the Jayhawks in their first game, who's going to be available. But right now they're scheduled to play, so we'll have to see.
Part of the stringent health and safety protocols to get to the bubble-like environment in Indianapolis, you need to produce 7 straight days of negative test results before you can land in Indy and be a part of the bubble environment for the NCAA tournament. Just rounding out the top 16 seeds for the NCAA tournament, the other 3 seed, Arkansas, and on that 4 line, Virginia, as we mentioned, in the West, Purdue in the South with Baylor, Oklahoma State in the Midwest region, and then Florida State rounding out the top 16 seeds in the NCAA tournament in that East region with Michigan. So pretty much in the top 16 seeds, what we expected, at least how it shakes out with some of the matchups. Now we need to talk about some of the biggest snubs left out of the field of 68 for this big dance. And we bring in our very own Tyler Aki, the host of Locked On Syracuse and our ACC correspondent, who is talking about a snub out of the Atlantic Coast Conference, the Louisville Cardinals, who are not featured originally in the field of 68, although they are one of the 4 replacement teams the committee has set just in case anything arises with some of those COVID issues. But Tyler, Louisville not being a part of this original field of 68 had to be a little bit of a shock for Cardinals fans watching Selection Sunday play out.
Absolutely, but at the same time, look at how the Cardinals finished the season. They lost 6 of their last 10, and when you look at their resume, they beat 1 tournament team all season long. They beat Georgia Tech. They were 1-5 against teams that made the field of 68. And to me, I've always been in the camp pretty much all season long that this should not be a tournament team because of the fact that look at their past. Look at what has happened to them this year. They have had 3 COVID scares within the program. You have your coach spotted on video partying without a mask after beating Kentucky for the first time in what felt like a million tries. So to me, this was not a tournament team. And the writing was sort of on the wall when you looked at Louisville. Look at what the bracketologists were doing with them as they started to get closer and closer to this Selection Sunday. They were falling behind teams like Michigan State, UCLA, Syracuse. And when you start to see those guys drop, when you see the Cardinals drop below those names, that's when you start to see yourself fall out of that field of 68.
One thing, Tyler, I think was really interesting was that last COVID pause. We saw him come out of it and get hammered by North Carolina. Do you think that's really what cost the Cardinals, their inability to put together a run of games and get that form and consistency?
Well, it wasn't just that one. I mean, their first COVID pause, too, they go out and get crushed by Wisconsin by almost a similar margin. So really, I was a part of the camp that said, okay, if you're not going to penalize them for their actions off the court, well, then you should penalize them for their results when they do get back on the court. And that's exactly what I think we saw play out with the committee.
Tyler, before we let you go, when we're talking about the biggest snubs of the NCAA tournament field overall, one of those teams that made it and maybe pushed out Louisville, your Syracuse Orange. The Orange, an 11 seed, they will match up with San Diego State in the first round of the NCAA tournament out in that East region. Your reaction to Syracuse getting back to the big dance, doing it in cardiac style here down the home stretch into the ACC tournament?
Well, my Orange and yours as well, Ben. When I look at Syracuse, the thing that was interesting to me with the Orange sneaking into the field was the fact that they're not playing in that first four. I think the committee looked at Syracuse and said, this is a way different team that won 3 of their final 4 games against some pretty good competition. And that's ultimately what pushed them into the field and helped them get a non-bye, or rather get the bye. So I think that was something that the committee took into account, that this team finished out strong. Meanwhile, a team like Louisville, they sputtered to close out the season.
Tyler Aki, who will be joining us throughout this Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special. He is not only our host of Locked On Syracuse, but also our mid-major guru today as we dive through the rest of this bracket and see how it shakes out, the matchups, and everything you need to know about the 2021 Big Dance. This is March. Tyler, thank you very much. We'll hear from you in just a little bit of time. So we're talking about snubs on the overall NCAA tournament field, who was left out of the field of 68. Let's also focus on some of the teams that made it into the Big Dance, but maybe not seated where they expected to be. And now we welcome on the host of Locked On SEC, Chris Gordy, who has a take on a team that played in the SEC championship game today, the LSU Tigers, who fell all the way down to the 7 seed line. Chris, your reaction to hear that LSU is a number 7 seed in this 2021 NCAA tournament?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's actually they're the 8th seed, and that's a slap in the face to LSU. You know, they happen to play a really good St. Bonaventure team at the 9 seed, but let's look at the facts. I mean, LSU was the 3 seed in the SEC tourney. They were a putback away from being the SEC champs. They had won 7 of their last 9 games coming into today with wins over Arkansas and Tennessee. Being lower than Florida is an absolute joke. I mean, when you go back a couple weeks ago, LSU had Texas Tech beat. Yeah, they let that slip away in the final minute, but I know wins matter, but LSU was projected as an 8 seed on Wednesday. Does anything that happened the last few days matter? Because apparently in the committee's room, it didn't.
Yeah, and anybody else from the Southeastern Conference, I think Florida maybe being overseeded in a sense. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I mean, Florida's a 7 seed is a joke. LSU's ahead of them in the NET ratings, and then Tennessee is a 5 seed. I got a buddy who's a big Vol fan texting me going, dude, what the hell? Like, why are we the 5 seed? Like, I get it, I'll take it, but it's like, I don't know. I wonder sometimes with the committee. I know a lot of times they've had their mind made up coming into Sunday, and it doesn't really matter. But my goodness, if anybody watched that SEC game today, it was a classic down to the wire with Alabama, and I get it. LSU didn't get the putback to fall. If they get it to fall, my question is, if they're SEC champs, what seed are they? Because having them as an 8 seed being that close to winning the SEC, I think is disrespectful.
2 of the top seeds from the SEC, the team that won the SEC tournament title, Alabama, on that 2 seed line in the East region, taking on Michigan, who will be the number 1 seed in that portion of the bracket. Also, Arkansas in the South region, the 3 seed. Chris, out of those 2 teams that have been neck and neck really at the top of the Southeastern Conference this year, who do you think has the best chance to make a deep run in the NCAA tournament?
Alabama is the most complete team that I've seen the SEC all year. I mean, my goodness, they're led by their senior guy in Herb Jones, defensive stalwart. He had 4 blocks today and a steal to go with 11 boards. Was the SEC Player of the Year, SEC Defensive Player of the Year. But then they got guys like Jaden Shackelford who could fill it up. I mean, he's shooting 33% from 3 on the year, but he shoots in volumes. I think he shot 400 3-pointers in the last 2 seasons there. You got John Petty, you got Keon Ellis. I mean, Bama is just a really complete team that will jack up 29 threes a game. They're like the Golden State Warriors of college football. They're fun to watch. I think they are the SEC's best chance to win a national championship. Nate Oates has done a tremendous job there.
Chris, thank you, and I'm sure you'll preview all of those teams with the SEC and how they'll do in the tournament on Locked On SEC. All right, now, Ben, we've got something else that's been a really big point of this NCAA tournament. I feel like a lot of times teams get close in power conferences to being bid stealers, but you really don't see it at that high level. We had two conferences this year that I would consider major conferences that had this happen. Oregon State stole a bid in the Pac-12 with a nice run that involved wins over Oregon, and they beat Colorado as well in the championship game. And then Georgetown, we saw them annihilate Creighton in the championship game to get one there. What are your thoughts on those two teams specifically as bid stealers?
Well, Georgetown, the magic in MSG, Patrick Ewing going back to the place that he built, even if he's not recognized at times, he built that Madison Square Garden, and the magic that you see in the Mecca in the Big East tournament is nothing to scoff at. Georgetown now playing their best basketball of the year. They came into the Big East tournament with a losing record. Now they are on to the big dance as a 12 seed. The other 12 seed, the Oregon State Beavers, finding their stride as well. And we go now to Locked On Utes, Brian Brown, who was our Pac-12 correspondent for this Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special. Brian, you watched a lot of Oregon State this year, I would presume, in their matchups with Utah and just knowing the Pac-12 conference in general. What did you make of the Beavers' run through the Pac-12 tournament to steal one of those bids and get into the big dance? Seems as though we are having some audio issues with Brian Brown right now. That is unfortunate. His mic's got to know this is March, and we need to be performing at our best. So some of those bid stealers, Josh, that you mentioned, to have Oregon State get into the field now, to have Georgetown get into the field, it probably kept some of those teams that the committee has in their replacement group of four out of the tournament. And that's a very interesting factor in this year's NCAA tournament. Obviously, for this year that we are playing in the midst of a global pandemic, to have replacement teams like we talked about with Tyler Rocky, Louisville, Colorado State out of the Mountain West, St. Louis out of the Missouri Valley, and then Ole Miss out of the SEC. When you saw the replacement teams at the end, what was your first reaction?
I was surprised there was no Duke, and not because Duke deserved it, because I thought that the committee sometimes can't help themselves, but put a team like that in there. And also they could potentially justify it by saying, well, they're playing well. The run got cut short because of COVID. And, other teams that we saw have their run cut short, they're in the field, in UVA and Kansas. So surprise there. Ole Miss, they slipped up late in the season, especially they had that loss against Mississippi State that I thought really hurt them. A team that was building some momentum. And then SLU was the St. Louis was the odd team out as well. So I think them as the odd team out in the A10 at least, because, the A10 is going to send two teams in VCU and St. Bonaventure this year. So tough for them to not be included. And then Louisville as well, which we've already hit on.
So about 20 minutes into this Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special, wherever you are following along, whether it's Locked On Live's YouTube page, Twitch page, Periscope on Twitter, or our Tegna affiliates across the country, we thank you very much. I am Ben Stevens, the host of Locked On Big Ten. They call me Big Ten Ben. Joined by my guy, Josh Neighbors, the host of Locked On Big 12, as we go through the 2021 NCAA tournament bracket. That we have a big dance is a celebration, and we will do that here on this Selection Sunday. And Josh, we look now at some of the best first-round matchups we will see on Friday and Saturday of this upcoming week. And we go for some quick reaction to our guy, Asher Lowe, the host of Locked On Badgers. Wisconsin, an 8 seed in the NCAA tournament, taking on North Carolina. That will be a very interesting first round matchup, whether you're a fan of the Tar Heels or the Badgers. Here's Asher Lowe.
Lowe from Locked On Badgers, your Locked On home for all things Wisconsin basketball and football, reacting with Locked On now to Wisconsin ending up as a 9 seed in the South region and having to face the 8 seed UNC with a date against Baylor awaiting the winner. The Badgers land as the 9 seed in the South. We thought 7 coming in, maybe 8. The Badgers slip all the way to 9, 2-6 in their last 8 games. Didn't help anything, even with the 5 quad 1 wins that Wisconsin has. And you get a UNC team that is a difficult draw personnel-wise for Greg Gard and crew, bringing length, athleticism, two things that give Wisconsin a ton of problems on the defensive end. And the Badgers have their work cut out for them in round 2 if they even get past this round 1. The scariest part about it all is probably that Baylor is waiting for the winner of Wisconsin and UNC. The Badgers need threes to start raining down at some point, like they did last February and March. The time is right now. As always, on Wisconsin.
Asher Lowe has been telling me all Big Ten conference season long that Wisconsin, if they were going to stumble into the big dance, it would be very dependent on matchups. If they could advance the round of 32, I think a lot of fans that root for that team in Madison, Wisconsin, saw the bracket play out to get a red-hot team out of the ACC in North Carolina, shaking their heads, not feeling very positive, as you got from Asher's reaction there. So we were talking about some of the big Steelers into this big dance, and we had our guy Brian Brown from Locked On Utes, our Pac-12 correspondent for this Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special. If he is back and having his audio issues fixed, I think we can bring him in now to get some reaction on Oregon State, the Pac-12 tournament champions, into the big dance with that tournament title and taking a spot away from somebody else. Brian, what did you make of the Beavers' run this past week in Las Vegas?
Yeah, I think it was so incredible that even my microphone was surprised that they got into the tournament. But as someone who watched Oregon State beat the University of Utah Utes both times this year, both at home and away, this is an Oregon State team that can surprise some people. They have some talent on this squad. Warith Alatishe is a very long, very athletic, very active defensive and rebounding player, and they are led by Jared Lucas, who's an incredible shooter and has been there for a while. And this is a team that really fights and plays together, and I think it's very reflective of Coach Wayne Tinkle and the things that he's been able to do, that they went and made this run through the Pac-12 tournament.
Hey, what about Colorado? They're a team obviously coming out of the Pac-12 that a lot of people like, right? McKinley Wright, Pac-12 Player of the Year, is a guy that a lot of people think could be a player that leads a run through March. And a lot of respect for Tad Boyle as well as the head coach. And we saw them play a really spirited game against USC in the tournament. What are your thoughts on Colorado and their chances to advance?
It's a very Tad Boyle-esque team. McKinley Wright is that guy who, he seems to always find a great wing player who can get in there and score for them. They have a really big, strong, low-post presence with Evan Batty, and this is an experienced squad. I think Tad Boyle is a kind of an underrated coach. He's not appreciated nationally like he is in the Pac-12, mostly because the Pac-12 really hasn't shown out like they should when they go to these tournaments. But I think this is a team that, with their experience, with the leadership and the ability that McKinley Wright has shown, they've been the most consistent team throughout the year. They could come into this tournament and surprise some people. I think the Pac-12 overall is probably properly rated in terms of how they've been seeded, but these are teams that, if they play up to their potential, which that's always been the question, they could surprise a lot of people.
Brian, you are in the state of Utah, so I want to ask you now not about a team from the Pac-12, but about a team that is out of the Mountain West Conference, the West Coast Conference, the number 6 seed in the East region, the BYU. They will be taking on the winner of one of those first 4 games between Michigan State and UCLA, whoever that 11 seed ends up being. What did you see out of BYU this year, and do you think that Mark Pope's team can make a deep run in March?
Well, entirely too much, being someone who's followed the University of Utah his entire life. But Mark Pope is a tremendous coach, and this BYU team is very sound and very fundamental. They have a fantastic freshman in Caleb Lohner, who I think could really impress some people. He's 6'8", he's athletic, he moves well, he has a lot of ability on the defensive end and rebounding. Matt Harms, the transfer from Purdue, is excellent, and he provides a lot of length for that team. But they have a lot of ability to score, and I think what Mark Pope has brought to this team is a sense of toughness and defense that maybe BYU teams haven't had in the past. They've just run through the West Coast Conference schedule. The only team that they really had any kind of issues with was Gonzaga, but they took them through the first half there. I think they really just ran out of gas after having such a long game the night before. They might have been able to, get the Zags there at the very end, but it is another team that I think out West is this year, with, as we've all seen with COVID, things have been so crazy. I think some of these Western teams have been under the radar because how good Gonzaga has been, and BYU could be another team that maybe sneaks in there. And I do think that they win this game to start out and they actually get all the way into the tournament.
Michigan State, a team that made it on the right side of the bubble coming out of the Big Ten. UCLA, another Pac-12 team. Our Pac-12 correspondent for the night, Brian Brown, the host of Locked On Utes. Brian was originally asked a question about Oregon State, who will be the 12 seed facing off against the 5 seed Tennessee in the round of 64. We have some reaction from Eric Kane, our host of Locked On Volunteers, on where Tennessee stands heading into the big dance.
Hey, it's Eric Kane, the host of Locked On Vols, at Locked On Vols on Twitter, at _Kaner on Twitter. You can find this podcast wherever you listen to podcasts each and every weekday morning when you wake up. Tennessee, a 5 seed in the Midwest region, will take on the 12th seeded Beavers of Oregon State. Now, this is a matchup that I'm excited about because both of these teams kind of play from their defensive strength. Neither team is flashy offensively. Neither team scores a whole lot of points. I think Tennessee's more athletic, obviously, with Keon Johnson, Jaden Springer, and E. Pons, but we'll certainly have to see. Oregon State was a team that was not highly picked coming into the season, went on a run there in the tournament, won the Pac-12 championship in the tournament action here over this weekend, and a team that's playing with a lot of momentum right now. But overall, I like this quadrant for the Volunteers. Of course, number 1, Illinois. You've got number 2, Houston, number 3, West Virginia. But if Tennessee plays to its strengths, I like the matchup on Friday, but we'll have to see if the offense can carry it the rest of the way. But for more on Locked On Vols, check it out at Locked On Vols on Twitter and wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you very much to Eric Kane, the host of Locked On Vols. Another great first-round matchup we have in the West region, where Gonzaga is the number 1 overall seed. Features Josh Neighbors' alma mater. The Missouri Tigers is the 9 seed, taking on the 8 seed, the Oklahoma Sooners, who, Josh, you covered them all year. They stumbled down the stretch, maybe fell back to that number 8 seed. Before we get your reaction on this matchup, as you have the two sides of your heart pulled against each other, let's hear from the host of Locked On Sooners, who has some reaction on where Oklahoma is heading into this big dance.
Hey, this is John Williams from the Locked On Sooners podcast, and now we know that the Oklahoma Sooners are in the 8th seed and will face the number 9 seed Missouri Tigers. Missouri comes into this matchup having won their opening round matchup against the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC tournament before falling to the Arkansas Razorbacks in the quarterfinals. Missouri comes in at 16-9 overall, 8-8 in the SEC, and it'll be a fun matchup that renews an old rivalry as Missouri returns to a matchup with their former Big 12 days, and the winner of this matchup will have the pleasure, sarcastically, quote unquote, of facing Gonzaga as the tournament's top seed. And it's going to be a tough matchup for Oklahoma. Oklahoma needs to find a way to bounce back after losing 5 of 6 to close the season out. But for more on this, make sure you go and subscribe to the Locked On Sooners podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Yeah, and you see it's going to be an interesting matchup with the 8 and 9. I mean, two similar teams. Both were in the top 10 at one point this season, and both have now slid all the way to an 8 and a 9 seed, so it should be very interesting. Some teams are kind of in that range, though, the mid-majors. We've seen a lot of strong pushes from mid-major teams this year. We're going to bring Tyler back in to talk about some of those mid-major teams. And Tyler, where does your eye go first? I think a lot of people like to say Loyola Chicago. I kind of think they got in some trouble. You actually don't want to be on the 8 or the 9 line because you have to play a 1 seed. I think almost being that classic 10, 11, 12 as a mid-major would have helped them. But what do you see with Loyola and some of the other teams at that mid-major level?
I completely agree with you, Josh. And really, it feels like the committee did it to set up the narrative that's the buzz in Chicago right now of if Loyola goes out and wins, they're going to take on Illinois. And that can revive the state of Illinois with basketball. But anyway, even that first matchup, I think, is a little difficult for the Ramblers as well. You're looking at two very defensive-minded teams. The Ramblers, the number 1 in Ken Palm's defensive efficiency. And then you've got Georgia Tech, who turns you over like no other. And we saw that in the ACC championship when they forced a record in terms of turnovers against Florida State. So I look at that one and say, that's really a toss-up for me. It's whoever's defense is going to travel better in that matchup. Everyone always likes to pick their 12-5s, and I've sort of come around to maybe we should start looking away from that a little bit, but I think there's some really intriguing 12-5 matchups this year. When you look at Winthrop, all right, a team that went 23-1 in the regular season, they take on the number 5 seed Villanova, and while Nova has the blue blood pedigree, they've got Jay Wright, who's won a lot of championships at that school. They also don't have their alpha, their leader, Colin Gillespie, one of the 3 Big East players of the year this season. So I'm wondering, what is Villanova going to look like without Gillespie and maybe without Justin Moore as well? Is that a matchup that Winthrop can take advantage of because they beat a couple of top 100 Ken Pom teams this season? And also, I look at Winthrop as maybe a team that can go a little bit deeper. Think about the way that some of these mid-majors set up their conference schedules this year. They were playing back-to-backs or they were playing 2 and 3 days. What's the setup of the NCAA tournament? Exactly that. So that's something that could favor some of these mid-major teams because they've been through it. They've gone through those testing protocols, sitting in your hotel all day. So I'm looking at some of these mid-majors. This could be a year where things really flare up with them. And then another one is UC Santa Barbara. They're a team that's a 12 seed. They're going up against Creighton, who's a 5. And I look at the Gauchos. They're a team that does not let up a lot of threes. And we know what Creighton's MO is pretty much year after year since Doug McDermott was there. We're going to launch a lot of threes. Well, if Santa Barbara's not going to let you take a lot of them, good luck. They could be another one of those prime 12-5 upsets.
And as a guy who used to work in Omaha, Nebraska and cover those Creighton Blue Jays, they have had their fair share of struggles in NCAA tournament opening games in the last couple of years. So as we're talking about some mid-majors, some potential upsets that we like in that first round, I think my eye goes, guys, to that 8-9 matchup between LSU and St. Bonaventure. We had Chris Gordy's thoughts on the fact that LSU slid all the way down to a number 8 seed. I want to bring him in now, the host of Locked On SEC, to get his thoughts on that opening matchup for the Tigers and how he thinks they might fare if they're on upset alert against the Bonnies. Chris, what do you make of that game?
Yeah, it should be a good one. I love when we get these, these Power 5 schools versus these little dogs that are, the little conference champs. But, man, they can play with the big dogs when the stage is set. The thing with LSU is they have played inconsistent defense for a lot of the year. Now, they played much better today against Alabama. They played much better yesterday against Arkansas. If they can carry that defensive effort into the tournament, look, they got two of the most dynamic scorers in college basketball when you talk about Cam Thomas and Trenton Watford. So that's one I can absolutely see, a potential upset happening. Another one, look, Missouri is the lower seed against Oklahoma, but man, Jeremiah Tillman, if he can get back to what he was earlier in the season, more like himself, you got Drew Smith, you got Xavier Pinson, but it's on Jeremiah Tillman. If he could come in and be that driving force for Mizzou, I think Missouri could pull that first-round upset over Oklahoma.
Chris, it's interesting you bring that up, too, and I want to talk a little bit about the Bonnies here in that 8-9 matchup against LSU, because they only played 20 games this season. A lot of these mid-majors, their schedule's drastically reduced because of the fact that there isn't the non-conference schedule that we're used to. And you're looking at a lot of teams that have not played a Power 5 yet this season. So that's another factor to take into account, because this could be a really weird tournament. While I think mid-majors have the advantage in terms of going through the schedule and having those back-to-backs in those 2 and 3 days, they also have not played some of the best yet.
Yeah, I think what we love.
I think another team to look for, guys, is UNCG. I wanted to ask Tyler really quickly about this. UNCG is a team with Isaiah Wright, great star player, and then also Wes Miller, their head coach, tremendous guy. He's been doing a great job there. 5 straight 20-win seasons. I think UNCG's got a chance to pull off an upset against FSU.
If you ask some UNC fans, depending on what game it's after, you'd say Roy Williams' seat is hot at sometimes. That's the way that they feel, because they've got a guy right in their neighborhood in Wes Miller. Isn't he the guy who's going to go on a little bit of a run, and then he gets the Andy Enfield, the Porter Moser treatment after the Spartans make a little bit of a run? That's what I'm kind of seeing out of UNC Greensboro. And they're taking on a Florida State team that I don't know if they're going to match up well size-wise and depth-wise, but we'll see, because these are two great coaches. That is a fantastic coaching matchup between Wes Miller and Leonard Hamilton.
So speaking of other mid-majors, although the West Coast Conference, depending on who you ask, not a mid-major conference, and we asked Brian Brown, the host of Locked On Utes, about the BYU Cougars and what they have here heading into the big dance. Let's also hear from Jacob Hatch, the actual host of Locked On Cougars, on his thoughts on BYU, and they're getting ready for the NCAA tournament.
Hey everybody, Jake Hatch here, host of Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, reacting with a Locked On now to BYU earning a 6th seed in the NCAA men's basketball tournament. The Cougars earned the right to face off against the winner of UCLA and Michigan State, who will play in a play-in game for the right to be the 11th seed and face the Cougars on Saturday. Looking forward to this matchup. The Cougars will face off against two of the blue bloods of the sport. Kind of a surprising draw for BYU, but an opportunity nonetheless, as they will face off against either Tom Izzo's Spartans or the UCLA Bruins. Looking forward to this matchup. BYU has proven all year long that their defense is more than capable of holding teams down. The bigger question will be, can their offense travel with them to the bubble there in Indiana? We're about to find out. I'm looking forward to it. We'll have more on this throughout the week as we get ready for that matchup on Saturday. Keep it locked right here on Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, proud to be part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
And a guy that knows Jake Hatch very well because they actually co-host the Locked On Utes podcast is our Pac-12 correspondent for this Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special, Brian Brown, back with us. And Brian, we've talked about Oregon State from the Pac-12. We hear Jacob's thoughts on BYU. We got your thoughts on the Cougars as well. Any other teams from the Pac-12, because it is that classic late night Pac-12 after dark, maybe some East Coast bias in some of those teams that come from the West Coast. A team maybe flying under the radar that some fans out in the rest of the country should be monitoring here as we get to the big dance.
I think one to watch is definitely USC. They were likely the most consistent team out here on the West Coast. And I think the big draw for them is Evan Mobley, the fantastic freshman. He's on everyone's NBA draft boards, and for good reason. He's a 7-footer that moves like a 6'5" guard. He can score from all positions on the court. He's an incredible defender. And USC has been one of the best defensive teams out here on the West Coast. That's a team that I think, while they have probably the most talent out here, in the Pac-12, rival UCLA is also another team that, as they kind of sputtered towards the end of the year, it wasn't indicative of who they were the entire season. And so I think putting them in the first four is a good opportunity to let them reset and try and prove that they are a tough, hard-nosed, fighting team under Mick Cronin, just like he has always produced.
Do you agree with the fact that they're in that first four? And tell us about this matchup, because Michigan State and UCLA in a first four game, that's a blue blood battle right there. And we're getting it, before the tournament proper even starts this weekend.
It is. I think it's very indicative of the year that we've been through with college basketball in general, where we've seen a lot of the blue bloods struggle, and other programs that had a little bit more consistency in terms of getting their programs through the pipeline have kind of risen to the top. I think this UCLA team lacks star power comparative to some of the other blue bloods, but they do have a very, very tough team, very tough mindset. I love the play of Tiger Campbell. He's a fun player to watch. He's easy to see on the court. You can't miss his hair when he's out there, but he's a great guard. And when he gets this team rolling and cooking, they really are fun to watch. They are strangely good at defense too, which is not something we've seen from UCLA in years past.
And that's the beauty of March, right? The names that we will remember throughout the NCAA tournament. Tiger Campbell with the hair to match. Brian Brown, thank you very much. The host of Locked On Utes, our Pac-12 correspondent. And we're talking about one of those play-in games in the first four matchups, UCLA and Michigan State for that 11 seed. And what better time to bring in our guy, Will Hunter, one of the co-hosts of Locked On Spartans, who has been covering Michigan State all year long. It seemed they were left for dead until late February, and then Michigan State back into the big dance for a 23rd straight season. Will Hunter, your initial reaction to Michigan State getting back to the NCAA tournament?
Are they, though? Are they technically in?
Yes, they call it the first round.
I love the candor.
I call it the first round.
This is a unique spot for anyone who's been around Michigan State basketball. It's the 24th straight year they've made the tournament. They've been a 10th seed, I think, before. I think it was 2011. I and many other Michigan State people have been spending the last week looking up bubbles and procedures for the first four. I didn't know automatic qualifiers couldn't play in the first four. I was like, we're good. Oregon State and Georgetown are going to be 12s. We're like, no, if you're an automatic qualifier, you can't go in the first. This is a new territory. So I don't even remember what the question you asked was. We're just I spent a half an hour not breathing and holding my newborn child, just pacing around the room. And I'm the calmer of the two of the hosts of Locked On Spartans podcast. I was going to ask you about your
co-host. How is Matt Sheehan doing? Have you heard from him? Are there still vital signs going on for him in East Lansing?
I hope so. Him and I were texting. He did a Locked On Now video, and I think just uploaded it. He's at his parents' house, so hopefully he's doing okay. I haven't checked the vital signs. I usually do a vital check with Matt. Every time.
There he is.
There he is.
Yeah, let's hear from Matt Sheehan. Let's see what he has to say. Shall we, Will?
I never want to feel that ever again. I never want to feel what we just felt there ever again. You go to every bracketologist, like MSU was in, not even in the first four, but they were in. And of course, we have to sweat out the entire half hour, 45 minutes, whatever it was. And of course, it comes down to the last 8 teams. I wanted to throw up because if MSU was not in that last play-in game, we knew that we were out because it's not like they would jump Maryland for the 10 seed regardless. I know that, I could just complain up and down about Michigan State not getting a bye, but honestly, and hey, maybe this is loser's way out. Maybe a lot of people disagree with this, but I'm just happy to be in. I'm happy to be in the tournament. Yes, MSU had a very impressive run at the end where they beat 3 top 5 teams. They also had a lot of blowout losses, though, guys. So I can't be a choosing beggar. I can't. First 4 is fine in my book. 23 years in a row. Cheers to that. And we all survived the selection show. The most important thing possible. Never want to do that ever again. Never. I'm going to keep drinking. See you guys.
I can only imagine, Will Hunter, what Locked On Spartans will sound like tomorrow morning to get people started on their Monday.
That's my man. That's Matt Sheehan. Ben, obviously we've talked a lot. I don't know, Josh, have you ever seen Matt Sheehan work in video form, podcast form, anything?
I've seen one Locked On Now video, and you can bet your behind that alcohol was involved. So it's always great to see that. No, he does a great job, and you guys are hilarious. So that was fun and cool to see.
That's my guy. He's much more calm than I thought he would have been, and reasonable because too many blowout losses. It's obvious the committee was weighing heavily. Their win-loss record didn't really give them a break for their COVID pause. And, that's a tough scenario to handle and didn't put as much weight in those big wins as we thought. So it's good to be in. Rather would be in the tournament. Ben, you and I can go back and forth about Syracuse and just that travesty of a seeding later.
Travesty. Come on, man.
Yeah, one win over a team in the Ken Pom top 30, and it was at home. Good stuff. Nice resume. I'm not bitter. Anyway, I know you got a lot of people to get to. We're just honestly, if you would have told us 3 weeks ago as Michigan State fans, hey, they're going to be in the tournament, not a single one of us would have believed you. So like Matt said, we can't be a choosing beggar. We got to be grateful that the streak has lived on. Not everyone got to say that. Duke's out, Kentucky's out. Not all the blue bloods were able to overcome a weird season. And Michigan State, thanks to just a really miraculous last couple of weeks where they took down Ohio State, Illinois, and Michigan, 2 1 seeds and a 2 seed, completely playing out of character for them, what they've done the entire season. They squeaked in, and that's good enough for us. And now we got to play UCLA, 2 blue bloods. Hopefully they can get past that and have a chance to actually win some games because they can beat pretty much anyone they've shown, but they can also lose to literally anybody by any margin. It is a weird team. But at the end of the day, we're just happy to definitely be in the tournament, and we're counting it. 24 years, the streak lives on. Never want to do this ever again. I'm done with the bubble. Good with it. Not fun. Don't want to do it again.
There you go. But you're back into the big dance for the 23rd straight season, in large part because Michigan State beat 3 teams that are ranked on the top 2 seed lines in the NCAA tournament: Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio State. Will, thank you very much. The host of Locked On Spartans, along with his co-host, Matt Sheehan, who you saw there, turning to maybe a beer or a frosty beverage to get him through the stress that is Selection Sunday, a team that did not have to stress, that did lose to Michigan State a couple of weeks ago, the Ohio State Buckeyes. But the Buckeyes playing much better throughout the Big Ten tournament, getting to the Big Ten title game today in an instant classic, taking Illinois to overtime, but ultimately falling short, but still a number 2 seed in the NCAA tournament. Now we welcome on the host of Locked On Buckeyes, Jay Stevens. You saw him earlier on this Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem show. We have about 15 minutes left here on Locked On Live before we get to the 8 p.m. Eastern hour. And Jay, we got your thoughts on Ohio State. Now I want to talk Big Ten bigger picture because the Big Ten has 9 bids to the NCAA tournament, 9 teams inside the field out of 14 teams from the Big Ten Conference. What did you make of the Big Ten this year for fans that are now tuning in for March Madness, and what can they expect when they see the Big Ten in the Big Dance?
Oh, boy. What can they expect? If you didn't watch Big Ten basketball, you're missing out on a good time. You're missing out on a chance to watch very physical play. You got numerous good big men. You have guys like Ayo Dosunmu as well that can kill you on the outside. And sticking with Illinois, they have Andre Cabello off the bench that can come off, and I don't know a guy that can guard him. He seems to get around every corner and use every angle. When you're there, then you got Illinois, Ohio State, Iowa, Michigan State. We just heard Will Hunter. So Michigan, you got so many teams in the Big Ten that I think the Big Ten gauntlet, as I called it, Ben, is going to be something that is going to prepare these teams so good for the one game, one day off, and then the very next game. You saw Ohio State on Sunday. They looked exhausted. They looked tired, but they kept on fighting. The gauntlet of the Big Ten will make so many of those teams be very tough to beat. And don't forget those pesky Purdue Boilermakers, the Fighting Nat Painters, they may make some noise in this year's tournament.
Thank you, Jay. And yeah, I mean, another conference did the same thing, the Big 12, right? I think iron sharpens iron, and I think the Big 12 is going to be experiencing the same thing. A lot of their teams ready to go. But in the Big 12, we got a lot of big draft prospects. Chris is going to come in here and help us break those things down. And Ben, one thing that we get to is we get Chris here is that usually sometimes we don't get all of the best draft prospects in the NCAA tournament. Ben Simmons, Markelle Fultz, both guys who were not in the NCAA tournament. Cade Cunningham's there. Jalen Suggs is in. Evan Mobley obviously is in. I mean, you have to get down the line to probably Charles Bassey from Western Kentucky before you can find somebody who's not going to be in here. And Chris, I mean, who catches your eye besides those obvious three? Cade Cunningham, Jalen Suggs, and Mobley are the big three. But who else do you think has a chance to improve the draft stock or just show people who are unfamiliar their quality?
Well, I've been getting feedback from some of our Arkansas brethren out there who are upset. Arkansas just had this long, win streak snapped by LSU, but that doesn't matter. They're one of the best teams out there. We're better than Alabama and all this. Okay, Arkansas, here's your love. Moses Moody, one of the most dynamic freshmen in college basketball, nearly carried the Razorbacks to an SEC title. He's going to be a top 10 pick in this year's draft. He scored 28 in that loss to LSU. He has scored 28 in 3 of his last 4 games. Arkansas is going to be a problem for a lot of teams, and a big reason is Moses Moody. I'm real excited to see what he does in the tournament. Let's not forget, guys like that can improve their draft stock throughout the tournament. If he carries this team to the Final Four or a championship game, we might be talking top 3, maybe top 2 picks. We'll see what happens. Obviously, there's some really good talent out there. Cunningham is just a monster, but Moses Moody, one of the guys to watch for Arkansas.
And Chris, when we look at the Alabama Crimson Tide, the top seed out of the SEC, a number 2 seed in this NCAA tournament, the SEC Player of the Year in Herb Jones, do you think he has an NBA future? Should fans be looking at him and seeing what his game would look like as it translates to the next level?
Yeah, not enough offense for me. I mean, obviously, look, if you want to survive in the NBA, you gotta fill it up. And I don't want to take anything away from him. I mean, look, he was the SEC Player of the Year, but some guys are just really good college players. Look, you play really good defense, somebody's going to give you a look. We'll see what happens. Maybe he's a second rounder. We'll see where he falls. I'm actually hearing John Petty from Alabama is probably going to get some looks late in that second round as well as Jaden Shackelford. But Alabama, kind of one of those teams that just really coached well, really plays well, but they don't have that clear-cut, NBA pedigree guy. I look at teams like Tennessee, my goodness, they've got Keon Johnson and Jaden Springer, both supposed to go top 12 in this draft. Either of those guys can fill it up and go get 20 points on any given night. Those are 2 guys to keep an eye on. And then, of course, for LSU, Cam Thomas is projected as a late first-rounder right now. So really, really good NBA talent to watch in this tournament. And that's what we remember, right, guys? Years later, when we're watching the NBA, we go, man, remember when he hit that buzzer beater against so-and-so? That's the fun thing to watch is when we see these guys go and have their NBA careers. We remember those moments in March that made them special.
Definitely, Chris, and thank you for that insight. And I think, you touched on those other ancillary guys, but the guys at the top, and I just want to speak a little bit about Cade Cunningham because I got to watch him play all season. And when I say it was an honor and a pleasure, it was definitely that. And, you think back how fun it was to watch Zion Williamson. It's been so much fun to watch Cade Cunningham play. He's the most selfless superstar in college, and Zion was too, but he is all about the team. Oklahoma State dealt with some issues this year in terms of NCAA. They were not sure whether they'd be able to play in the tournament or not. But Cade has been 2 feet in the entire time, and he's a special player, special playmaker as well, Ben. So who are a couple of guys in the Big Ten that you could see, risers, I guess is the right word in terms of draft that we're going to get a good look at?
The Big Ten might not have any lottery guys that jump off the page, but a name to certainly know is Illinois star player Ayo Dosunmu. He is moving up the draft boards as we speak after an incredible junior year in Champaign. He was in contention for the Big Ten Player of the Year, still a part of the National Player of the Year conversation, a dynamic 2-way guard for the Illini, who I think is my favorite to go and win the NCAA tournament. Another name, Michigan's Franz Wagner. He might be the best NBA prospect out of the Big Ten Conference because of what he can do on both ends of the floor. And a name you will hear a lot about Iowa's Luka Garza, the two-time Big Ten Player of the Year, who should be, in my opinion, the National Player of the Year, and I think he will get that hardware when all is said and done. He might not translate all that well to the NBA, but what I will say, enjoy this moment because we only have Luka for the rest of this stretch run in March, and watch him play in the NCAA tournament, the most skilled big man you will see in all of college basketball, and in my mind, the best player this year in college hoops. So those are some of the draft prospects to watch from the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC. I'm sure we'll hear some more about the ACC. And one of those teams in the ACC, we heard this great first-round matchup earlier on. We had the 9-seed Wisconsin and their perspective from Locked On Badgers, Asher Lowe. Now we get the outlook of the North Carolina Tar Heels and the host of Locked On Tar Heels, Candace Cooper.
What's going on, everybody? It's Candace Cooper here from Locked On Tar Heels. And of course, you can follow at Locked On Heels on Twitter, and you can follow me at Candace D. Cooper as we recap the fact that Carolina is going to be the number 8 team taking on the number 9 Wisconsin Badgers in what will be an exciting matchup. One, Carolina's coming off 3 good wins, obviously the loss against Florida State in the semifinals at the ACC tournament, but hey, they played hard, they played well, and it's about dang time that we finally see who this Carolina team is. All season long, they've had an identity of inconsistency, but they were finally able to pull off some wins and get back in games that certainly a lot of people counted them out. So we're hoping to see that kind of toughness, that kind of mental toughness against a very good Big Ten team. And honestly, it's whoever Carolina wants to be that day. So I think that's why I'm pretty excited, a little bit anxious to see which Carolina team is going to show up, because I think that if Carolina can come make their field goals, if they can make their free throws in the clutch, which is going to be the difference between winning and losing games for Carolina, they are going to be the team to beat in this tournament. I'm telling you now. I understand you got some top teams. I understand that Baylor will become next if Carolina beats Wisconsin, but I still feel confident in my guys. So we'll see how it turns out, one game at a time. Survive in advance literally has to be this team's mentality.
Yeah, and UNC's got an interesting matchup if they were to win. They've got a lot of size in that team and a lot of skilled size. Baylor does not have that much size. So I think Baylor should be really concerned if they do draw UNC. Ben, any 1 seeds for you that you kind of like their path? Gonzaga's path is pretty nice. Any other 1 seeds for you, though, their paths kind of stick out?
I look at Illinois, and not just because I think the Fighting Illini are the team that will win the NCAA championship when all is said and done, but the 2-seed Houston, the Cougars out of the American, nothing against what Kelvin Sampson has done in that program, but they have very high metrics, and they have played in one of the weaker leagues, I guess, when you compare that to the rest of the power groups, the high majors that we're talking about in the Big 10 and the Big 12. And at times when you watch Houston play, the metrics that back them up don't necessarily equate to what you see on the floor. So having them as the 2-seed, I think that favors Illinois. West Virginia is going to be very tough as the 3-seed, as is Oklahoma State, who is surging right now. But when I look at the bracket playing out, I think it is very favorable for Illinois in that Midwest region to make a run to the Final Four and to have a great chance to cut down the nets in early April. Josh, what about you when you look at some of the 1 seeds and their paths to maybe taking home an NCAA tournament championship when we get to early April?
Well, Gonzaga, I mean, Oklahoma and Missouri have both been backsliding. So if they get that matchup, if they win their game, which we think they will, it might not be that hard. UVA, Sweet 16, could still have some lingering COVID issues at that point. And I think that team needed the ACC tournament to become a more finished product. Obviously, we saw Creighton falter. Kansas, we don't know about either. And then, down the line, Iowa, but we've seen Iowa fall to elite competition on several occasions. So I think Gonzaga's path lines up pretty well for the Zags.
So now as we bring everybody back in, we have 5 minutes left here on the Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special coming to you wherever you are following on YouTube, on Twitch, on the Tegna affiliates across this great country. Let's give some quick picks of who we will think in the national championship game, maybe the Final Four as well, and who will be the champion when all is said and done. We welcome in all of our correspondents for this night. We have Chris Gordy from Locked On SEC, Tyler Rocky of Locked On Syracuse, who has been our ACC and mid-major correspondent, and Brian Brown of Locked On Utes, our Pac-12 correspondent for this evening. We'll start with the guy out of the Pac-12. Brian Brown, who do you think is playing in the Final Four, the national championship game, and give us a champion when all is said and done?
Being on the West Coast, I've had an opportunity to watch a lot of Gonzaga basketball, and I think they're the best team in college basketball this year. They're going to be my pick to go all the way. I also think that Baylor, coming out of a Big 12 conference that's really been exciting and competitive this year, will probably match up across from them.
Tyler Rocky, we now go to you. Give us the ACC perspective and who you think is the national champion.
Well, I'm not very high on any of these ACC teams. I think they got some strange draws across the board and nothing that is going to really help them out path-wise. So I'm not looking at really any of these ACC teams getting into the Final Four. I like Gonzaga. I like Baylor. I know it's not anything out there, but those have been the two best teams all season long. And then I sneaky like Texas to come out of the East region there because I think their size could give people a lot of fits. You look at a team like Alabama, they've had some trouble with size. Can they match up with Hunter Dickinson? Well, that could be another size matchup. That advantage goes to Texas. And then I like Illinois. So 3-1 seeds, I know, but I'm going to go with those three, and then I'm going to go with Texas.
Chris, what about you? You seeing any other upsets in your Final Four?
Yeah, I mean, look, when you pick these, you can't go all chalk, right? I mean, when you're filling out your bracket, don't be the idiot who puts all 1 seeds. Come on, man. You're going to get those points with those upsets. That's how you're going to win your bracket and win all that money. So I've got Gonzaga in there. They're the most complete team I've seen all year. They're going to be in the Final Four, I think. But Texas is one that I really like out of the East. I think they could get in as the 3. I like Arkansas coming out of the South as a 3 seed. I know I said Alabama earlier, but the more and more I start to look at that Arkansas team, I think they can get really hot. And they come out of the Midwest. I'm opposite of you guys. I think Houston is the real deal. Quentin Grimes, that is really, really good in that veteran group that Coach Kelvin Sampson has. I like U of H. So there you go, a 2 seed, 2 3 seeds, and a 1 seed.
I'll tell you what, KU wishes they had Quentin Grimes right now that could use a perimeter scorer. All right, Ben, you are up, my friend. What do you got?
I think Gonzaga comes out of the West. I actually agree with Chris Gordy. I'm riding the must bus. I'm going to say Arkansas out of the South. In the Midwest, my champion is Illinois. And then out of the East, listen, I'm a Big Ten guy. I think Michigan can piece it together. The health of Isaiah Livers by the time we get to the second weekend will be key for the Wolverines. So that is my Final Four. Gonzaga, Arkansas, Illinois, and Michigan. I think it will be Illinois and Gonzaga in the national championship game. And then the Illinois Fighting Illini will deliver the Big Ten its first national championship in more than 20 years. What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I'm kind of a little bit different than you. Not as much Big Ten love here. I've got Texas. I'm in agreement with Tyler on that one. Gonzaga finds a way to the Final Four. I'm going to go with Baylor tentatively, right now, and then Illinois as well. We get that Illinois-Baylor rematch. I've got Illinois in the championship game playing Texas, and I think Illinois is going to beat the Texas Longhorns in the national championship game. So there you go.
The 2 national championship picks for the Illinois Fighting Illini. That makes my Big Ten heart very warm. Thank you to everybody that tuned in here on the Locked On Live Bracket Mayhem special. We had correspondents and local hosts all across the Locked On Podcast Network's college channel. Brian Brown of Locked On Utes, our Pac-12 correspondent. Tyler Aki of Locked On Syracuse, our ACC and mid-major correspondent. Chris Gordy of Locked On SEC. Josh Neighbors of Locked On Big 12. I am Ben Stevens, the host of Locked On Big 10. Thank you very much for tuning in. Enjoy the madness. It all gets started in just 2 days from now, Wednesday, with the first 4 play-in games in both Mackey Arena and Assembly Hall, all in the great state of Indiana. And then the round of 64 begins on Friday and Saturday, the round of 32 on Sunday and Monday. So that is what the NCAA tournament bracket looks like. Josh, we have made it. It was a pleasure doing this show with you. We have an NCAA tournament on the horizon.
This is March, baby.
This is March. Thank you to everybody for tuning in, all of our Tegna affiliates across the country as well. For Josh Neighbors, the host of Locked On Big 12, I am Ben Stevens, the host of Locked On Big 10. The tournament gets started in just about 48 hours from now.